Dear GTM strategists, let's talk about consulting and fractional roles today. With us is Jason Knight. He has 23,000 followers on LinkedIn, 27,000 on Twitter, just under 2,000 Substack subscribers, and 1,500 downloads on average for every podcast episode he publishes. But do you know him as a consultant and interim CPO? Let's tackle this part of his professional life, and I hope you will get plenty of inspiration to get the best value out of consultants, advisor, mentors, experts, and even learn how to go solo if you really want to. Let's talk. Jason, first of all, good to have you on the other side of the mic for the change. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. And for those that are listening that don't know, Maja came on my podcast a few months back, so she's obviously going to get her own back in this one and start to throw a few hard questions at me, which I'm all for. But yeah, it's interesting to be on the other side of the camera.
Yeah, definitely. That's my sole purpose here. So let's start with your main career milestones. So, what have you been doing in life that led you to where you are today?
Well, my first career milestone, if we can call it that, go back a reasonably long time because I'm quite old. I don't like to, make people feel bad, but I'm pushing 50, so it's been a while. But one of the first things that happened to me was dropping out of university. So I went to university to study mathematics and computing, lasted a year, didn't handle university very well at all, dropped out, crashed straight out to the bottom of the system and ended up taking a 2-week job at a call center just to, get a bit of extra spare cash and end up working there for about 2.5 years. So you can see how successful my initial job hunting was. I then spent a bunch of time using my fundamental computing skills to transfer into their computing department, programming little green screens. So again, I'm pretty old. But then started moving up as the kind of market research industry, which is what it was, started to kind of go through its whole transformation into going away from telephones and people in clipboards on the street and more towards online surveys and panels and like YouGov and that type of thing. So spent a lot of time basically learning how to build products, but we never called them products at the time because we were a services organization. We were working directly for clients. I had to kind of charge time specifically to individual clients. So like it was very much a services organization. But as the company kind of scaled and grew, it got acquired by a big private equity firm. We had to start digitally transforming. It was like the first time you hear that term. We've got to digitally transform. And you can imagine like 100-year-old German market research firm that's got such rich history behind it. Like it's not necessarily the easiest place to do that. But we got a load of people coming in that started to really kind of persuade me that some of the stuff that I've been doing for years around standardization and building global platforms was really product work. And looking back, it really was. So that's when I started getting interested in kind of going all in on the product because I started out as an engineer. I was someone that just built stuff and went into engineering management and started helping to decide how we build the stuff and staffing and strategy and all of that stuff. So it was kind of a natural thing for me to start getting interested in the people side anyway, and the strategy and the business side. And once I started to realize, hey, this product stuff is what I've been doing, but there's bits that I haven't done yet, I wanted to go and do those things. And I thought that maybe being in a big corporate wasn't the best place to do that. So I went out and started working with a few startups, did that for a few years, and then decided after finishing one job, I don't really want to work for just one startup anymore. I want to work for lots of startups because I'd seen a few things. Obviously, as we know, got the podcast, got the content stuff that I do, done a lot of coaching and mentoring. I'm like, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of people that need quote unquote help, or they need assistance, or they need some kind of guidance. I think I can give it to them. So why not go and try and do that and see if I can make a success of that and kind of become a product myself.
Interesting. The way how you explained it really led me to this idea that your decision to go solo was altruistic, but also a kind of very natural way how your career evolved. So, is there anything else that you just want to share in terms of what led you to say, no, right now I'm my own product, I'm doing it for myself, let's help hundreds and thousands of people in order to have a desired pet?
Well, it might sound altruistic, and I guess there is some level of altruism in it. But if we think about like why my initial content stuff started, why I started my podcast back in 2020, for example, like I did that because I wanted to kind of get out there, put my face out there, obviously put my voice out there, and it felt like written content there was a lot of, but there weren't so many podcasts then. There were loads more podcasts now than there were then. Like everyone started a podcast in the pandemic. I was just one of the earlier ones in the pandemic that did that. So if I look back on it, like that wasn't me going, oh, I'm just going to throw myself onto the fire so that I can help as many people with my inspirational voice. It wasn't anything like that. It was like, I don't have many people to talk to about this stuff. Let's go and find some. And then as that progressed, then you start talking to more people, great people, wonderful people like yourself and some of the other thought leaders in the industry. And you start to learn loads. Here you go. But then you start to learn loads of things, and you start to widen your perspective, and you start to realize that maybe the world's a bigger place. But also, I did a lot of mentoring whilst I was working full time in companies. Like I remember once, I can't remember which year it was now because it all blurs into one, but there was one January or so that I basically put something out on Twitter back when we all use that all the time. And I said something along the lines of, hey, anyone want product management mentorship? Here's my Calendly link. Let's go. And I thought, maybe I'll get 2 or 3 people come to me. And actually I got like something like 90 people or something like that booked me solidly, one a day for like 3 or 4 months, one every working day. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people that need mentorship. And, part of that then led me to go down the path of creating my own mentorship side project, which, is a thing that's still running. But part of it also made me think, well, there's a lot of people out there that need help. And of course, people work for companies, and they all work for lots of different types of companies. And I'm not going to sit there and naively say that I can help every single company in the world, but there are lots of companies that I can help through their people to do better. But really, a lot of what I try to focus on these days is much more on the kind of the human factors. Like, there's OKR coaches and there's strategy coaches and there's transformation coaches. And I can obviously do a bit of all of those things, but I really want to focus on the people. And whether that's altruistic or not, I mean, I still want to get paid, so it's not that altruistic, but I want to help people do better jobs. And by doing that, enable companies to get better results.
Supremely interesting. I still think that it is altruistic because money is just a coincidence of like transferring the value, but nevertheless, it takes heart of a teacher and like a lot of patience, a lot of love for people and science in order to engage in such endeavors. And especially since you come from engineering backgrounds, I mean, it's so difficult for people to just like open up or even decide to invest that chunk of their time, their spare time in the beginning, in order to create a content stream. Before we hop and dive further into this, there is just like one additional part of your life that I would love to dig further for very selfish reasons. So the fractional / interim roles. I know that you have been taking a couple of those. So mentorship, consulting, what's that? That's like kind of a blind spot for me. How did you even decided to do that, and how does it look?
Well, the question you have to ask yourself in these situations, like, so I come out of a job, I wanted to know what was next. I had a bit of runway myself. And I think to be honest, anyone that wants to do that kind of thing, having runway is everything, right? Like if you can sit there and like it's like with the startup, if you can sit there and say, well, I've got 6, 12, whatever months of basically money in the bank that can pay the bills, keep the kids alive, all of that stuff, then that takes the pressure off to some extent. Like it's not going to last forever, but it lasts long enough. So I sat there and I was like, well, I do have runway. I had 6 months or something at the time. So I was like, okay, fine. I don't just want to jump into another job. And I don't know if you've had this in your career, or I'm sure listeners to this may have had. Sometimes you stick it out at one job, maybe a little bit longer than you should, because you don't want to be seen as a quitter. You want to be seen as someone that's doing a good job and contributing and growing and all of that good stuff. But maybe the job's not quite the right job, for whatever reason. And it's not like that one side is bad or the other. Like sometimes it's just a poor fit. And you look at it and you go, okay, fine. Well, I stayed at one job maybe a little bit too long, then the next job a little bit too long. And what happens when you stay at one job for a little bit too long is you make a panic decision. It's like a panic buy. You're buying the last loaf of bread on the shelf, even though it's maybe a little bit stale. And I didn't want to do that again. I wanted to take a minute and I wanted to think about the sorts of things that I could do and the difference that I could make. And again, with the mentoring, it's an easy thing to just sit there and say, oh, I could just go and mentor 1,000 people. The problem is no one wants to pay for that kind of thing. And I still do have kids and, a family to contribute to and keep them alive and clothed and fed and stuff. So how can you make money whilst helping people? Well, I actually went out, I'm very lucky through the podcast. I have a very large network these days, as you know. And I went and tapped up a few different people. And I'm not going to name drop because, I'm not that kind of guy anymore, but like it's just, I spoke to a bunch of different types of people that did different types of things. I spoke to consultants, I spoke to coaches, I spoke to content people, I spoke to evangelists, and all these different types of people that were doing different types of work around the work. And I asked some of these people, like, well, do you feel like a talking head? Like, do you just sit there and think, well, I'm not really a product person anymore. I'm just a talking head that talks about product and kind of aggregates everyone else's opinions. And some people are doing that, like, and that's fair enough. But some of these people are like, yeah, I do feel like that, and it worries me every day. Some of these people are like, I do feel like that, but actually I don't care. Like, I love doing it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, there's two different approaches there, and there are lots of other approaches. I did a lot of self-reflection and realized that what I wanted to do was stay close to the people and close to the work. I didn't want to just be seen as a theoretical person that just consumed Medium and all these other sources of insight and spoke to people, but never actually got involved and stuck in. So I wanted to stay stuck in. So for me, I looked at it, I'm like, well, how can I stay stuck in, but still help people? And by helping people, help companies. And of course, then you look at it and you go, well, I can go and consult. I can go and work with organizations on a short-term or part-time basis and try and help them fix some of their problems. So try and help them identify their problems, because all companies have problems. Like, there's no company out there, even the best companies have problems. So like, can I apply product management to companies? Like, can I go in and start to do discovery on the companies? Can I go in and start to come up with a backlog and a prioritization order for the things that need to be fixed that are holding that company back? And it kind of felt to me very natural. It's kind of a part of being a product manager, I guess. You just get good, if you're doing it right, you get good at, call it what you want, but like systems thinking, sort of considering everything else and the why behind the why, and asking good questions and empathizing with people and prioritizing for impact and all of that good stuff. So I kind of looked at it as a natural progression, and it felt like something that I could do, but obviously you still then have to go and get the work. And I was lucky that I went and got the work. I got my first contract relatively early on, and everything else then just carried on from there.
Fantastic. There are a couple of so good pointers that we will continue to work on, but I would double down on relevance right now. Because when you say talking head, this is like my number one concern as well. I like to be in the trenches. I literally feed upon this information. This is just like probably my anxiety to remain relevant and best in class, because I don't want to be this overpaid edutainment at companies and like working with 10-year-old decks or something like that. It's really, really, really important to be in touch with the business practice. But my assumption is that if I called you today and say, Jason, come and work with Growth Lab, we are a living, meeting bread. We need somebody to handle our processes and to help us scale better. We probably wouldn't be a good fit because you have criteria for yourself, right? So for the fractional roles and more hands-on work, what companies do you welcome in your network?
Well, this is interesting, right? Because I was chatting, and I think I told you this story the other day, so you're going to get bored by this story. But I was talking to someone the other day that was trying to get into fractional work. And, I do have a few people around and about that occasionally tap me up and say, oh, hey, what about all this stuff? Like, how do I do it? And I wrote an article a few months back now, which I'm sure we can link into the notes, which talks all about like how I did it. And, maybe that's not the right way for everyone, but it certainly worked okay for me. And a lot of people have come back to me and said, that's a very helpful article, Lane. Thank you very much. So like, that's good. That was kind of my almost stopping having the same conversation 100 times, exactly like, what is a fractional person or whatever. So I just put it all down and hope that would help people at least get started. But I still talk to a lot of people about like, some of the nuts and bolts or how to do it in their situation. And I think one of the things that it's interesting, I say this to people often, and it's, to someone like yourself, this is also going to be super obvious because of all the work that you do, but like, you've got to nail down your ICP. You've got to nail down your value proposition. You've got to nail down why people should even hire you in the first place. No one's going to hire you as a fractional person just because you want to spend time with your family. Like, you should spend time with your family. I want to spend time with my family, but that's not why people are hiring me. Like, that's not part of the story that's interesting to someone that's buying my services. I need to go out and prove to someone that by getting me part-time, for example, that they're going to get some kind of result, and that the types of people that they are, company-wise, are, that I'm going to get a result for that type of company. So on the one hand, I sit there and say to people all the time, like, do that, or do all of that work, like all of the stuff that's basically in your book, to try and nail all your offer down and all of that stuff. I've also not really done it myself so far. I'm a complete hypocrite. And I'm quite lucky in a way, again, because of this network that I've built and the contacts that I have and the, for want of a better word, reputation I may have in certain parts of the industry. I do get inbound approaches from time to time. Certainly not millions. I'm not like fighting off 100 a day or anything like that. But, I get occasional inbound stuff where people are, oh, hey, could you do some coaching? Or, oh, hey, I've got a problem at a company. Could you maybe chat to me about it? And, some of those chats turn into work and some of them don't. But I've not had to do the really, really hard work of saying no to people yet. And a consultant friend of mine once said, he's been doing it for like 20, 30 years. Sometimes you just have to say yes at the beginning. Like, you don't get to say no at the beginning because you need to start building up credibility. You need to start building up kind of, reputation for doing that stuff. And I guess it's almost analogous to like an early startup, just doing whatever it takes, just any feature that anyone asks for just to start to get some kind of purchase. And the problem is, of course, as with startups, you get to a point where you can't, that's not sustainable anymore. Like, you can't just keep doing everything for anyone. So I have been doing a bit of thinking actually this week, because I'm kind of in between contracts at the moment. Got little bits and pieces, but I've not got any big contracts at the moment. Finished up a couple, thought I'd take April. A bit of self-reflection, like almost like a Tibetan retreat, but not quite, because I'm still in the same house, in the same room. But, I did some reflection, and, I'm a B2B guy. Like, all my experience is B2B. All the stuff that I talk about is basically from a B2B context. So, like, B2B companies are clearly the people that are most interesting to talk to, because they have a lot of the problems or challenges that can be solved by someone with my experience. And I'd also throw B2B2C into that context as well. Not all B2B2C companies have that kind of, the same characteristics, but many do. So I'd kind of give those an honorary mention as well. And there's definitely things that I can do for very sort of sales-led B2B2C organizations as well. But that's another thing, sales-ledness. Like, companies, I'm as up to date with the PLG stuff as the rest of the world. But like, a lot of the work that I've done has been with companies that work with sales teams. It's a problem that people constantly bring up, is that it's really hard for product teams to work with sales teams. So if a company has a sales team, and that's their kind of primary growth driver, then that's definitely a type of company that I can work for. Probably in the sort of not the super early companies, because they probably need people that have different interests or a certain sort of different set of skills to kind of get that initial ideation off. Like, I want to go in and work with a team, either to set up a team or to optimize or work with, or in some extreme cases, replace a team that is already working on the product and maybe struggling a little bit because they've got to that point of scale where things have started to slow down. Maybe things aren't working as well as they used to. Maybe they're starting to fall victim to the fact that they just did everything for everyone and now there's no strategy and everything's too disconnected and they're trying to build too many things at once. So that kind of company, sort of, 5 to 50 million or something like that, relatively early, but still decent size, got teams, got processes in place, probably started to build in some inefficiencies, probably started to see some misalignment problems. Those are the types of companies that I think are kind of sweet spot, the companies that I should be going and talking to.
Fantastic. Let's double down on this. Are there a couple of examples that you could be sharing in terms of your fractional and interim CPO roles? What are the cases that you can tackle? Could you give us something more to dwell on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to breach any NDAs because that's always a tricky one. But yeah, I've worked with companies, for example, to go in and literally, like, they don't have a product management team, or they have have one product manager, and they want to have more because they've got a portfolio now. They've started to grow past their initial offering. Maybe one of the founders was taking the lion's share of the product kind of vision and strategy, but that person's now not got enough time anymore. And also they've kind of grown to a point where that very reactive, field-led decision making has started to lead to a bit of a backlog. But also they didn't have a team. Like, they had one product manager, they needed more. So obviously you could just go out and hire more. But what they wanted to do, and it's not a bad idea in many ways, is to kind of just bring together people that they'd identified high potential from different parts of the business and put them together into a new team and train those people to be product managers. So, like, literally the first day question was from these people, what's a product manager? So it's that kind of level of kind of product immaturity for the people. And, I don't say that word to try and be offensive. It's just like they just didn't know. So you're very much sort of building from the ground up and making a product management team, which I think is an exciting challenge. And, I'm not going to sit there and say that I solved every single problem for the company, but my out there was set the stage, kind of get people used to the ways of working, train them up, steady the ship, hire a new person, full-time person that can come and do this thing, take on the work and take it into the future. So, I think that's kind of for me, almost a perfect use case for me. Like, go in, look at how they're working, identify the things that are maybe holding them back a little bit. I think for that company, I did a little report as well, just sort of like a organizational health check that you do to start with, just to kind of lay out all of the different pain points, start to prioritize solutions. And you go in there, you start working with them on that stuff. And then you get to a point where you're like, okay, we're good enough now that someone can come in and take it on. Like, no one's going to have to come in and do the surgical work. Like, they're going to have to come in now and get the person fit again rather than set everything up from scratch. So, like, that was a pretty interesting one for me. I've also had other ones where you go in and it's like, well, we've got a head of product that we're not sure if they should be the head of product, but let's check it out and see if they're the right person for the job, or if we need to hire a new one. And also just kind of, again, reevaluate how we're working, because we're starting to have problems in certain areas, disconnections, misalignments, whatever. So you go in and you speak to a lot of people. A lot of my work these days, and it sounds maybe slightly disappointing to these makers out there that are making stuff all the time. A lot of my work these days is talking to people, trying to dig into what it is that's sort of holding them back, and trying to get rid of those things so that they can then work out, well, let's start making great products again now, rather than why are we just talking about making great products all the time? Like, I don't want them talking about making great products all the time. I want them making great products all the time. So I see my job as going in and really trying to remove those limiting factors so that they can start to do their best work, rather than me going in like on a horse with a shield and a sword because I'm a knight, saying like, oh yeah, I'm going to come in, I'm going to fix your backlog, I'm going to give you a new strategy, I'm going to do all these things. Like, yeah, I can do all of those things if you really need me to, but that's not really my job. My job is to come in and make sure that your people can do that. So that's really the kind of the angle that I try and take.
Fantastic. Beautifully explained. And just like in terms of mental barriers, I was really happy that beforehand you openly talked about runway and finance, because sometimes if people are very scarce on resources, they make decisions which might not be optimal, right? So they are either like panic decisions or something that's just like comes their way and maybe is not like an ultimate fit. So ceteris paribus, when this site is handled, is there anything else that might be problematic, that might be holding people down when they are just like choosing this route of either spending and going solo on their service businesses, or just like transition organizationally to maybe like an elevated version of themselves? So we already said that this resource part is very important. Are there other things that we should be considering that might be self-sabotaging?
If we're talking about, again, fractionals and consultants, I think that one thing I see, and I see it a lot, and I'm sure you see this too, every day on LinkedIn, there's like 19 new consultants or coaches. Like, everyone's like, hey, I'm a coach now, exciting news, or hey, I'm a consultant now, exciting news. And like, to be honest, I'm 100% happy for every single one of those people, because that's what I did. Like, I can't sit there and judge these people and say, oh, well, yeah, everyone's jumping on the bandwagon now, because, I basically came out of a job, took a minute, and decided I wanted to go a different way. And I think that there's a lot of people these days as well, obviously with all the layoffs that are going on, or people just burning out in different organizations and wanting to take a beat, that they all kind of come out of it and they're like, right, fine, this is what I want to do now, or at least this is what I want to try. And there are two truths that you'll find if you do that. As any advice to anyone that's out there that's maybe thinking about doing this. First of all, get that post up that says that you're doing this thing, put your selfie on the bottom, whatever it is that you need to do, because that is the most excitement you're ever going to get for you being a consultant. You'll get all the likes, everyone will be cheering you on and clapping and whatever. You post the same similar sort of post 3 weeks later saying, "Hey, I'm still a consultant, everyone." Crickets. There's gonna be no excitement anymore because that's just what you are now. Kind of reminds me of back in the day when I was learning Spanish. When I first started learning Spanish, and you go to like a Spanish, restaurant or something like that, and you say like "hola" or something like that, everyone's really excited. Like, wow, that person knows a few words of Spanish. When you get to the point where you can actually have a reasonably okay conversation in Spanish, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that guy just speaks Spanish now." So like, there's this like lack of excitement once you're actually that thing. So like, don't take the initial excitement as like a almost like fake product market fit in a way. Everyone's going to be excited for you, but you still have a lot of work to do. And I think that's one of the things is like, I don't want people to think that this is just an easy option. And I'm sure that a lot of people don't think this is an easy option, but it's not an easy option. Like, you have to be different to how you were before. Like, I had to do a lot of work even when I started, and I'm sure you had this when you started out as well. It's like, I'm a business now. I need to work out all this thing. I've got to work out about all this insurance liability stuff. I've got to sort out my own taxes. I've got to start working out all these other different things and register for sales tax and all this stuff. And I didn't know any of these things before. Like, at the time that I left my previous job, I'd literally never done any single bit of research on any of these things. So you just sit there and you're like, okay, fine. So okay, I'm a business now. I've sorted that stuff out. You probably only have to do it once, really, and then you just have to make some payments to the government every now and then. Okay, fine. But then you're sitting there thinking, I want to go out and do my best work now. I want to go out and coach some people. I want to go and consult with some people. That's cool. You should do that. And hopefully you can find someone to do. But finding people is a constant trouble. As you know, like, you've got to go out and find these people. These people aren't going to drop in your lap. So anyone that's just sitting there thinking that they can, I don't know, post a cheerful LinkedIn post every now and then and just get 500 leads and just pick and choose, take whatever they want, I don't think that works. I mean, I've not spoken to a single person that that's worked for. Even people that are quite high profile aren't getting kind of inundated with leads all the time. And again, maybe there are some that are. Like, maybe there are some people that are so high profile and so well regarded that they've got like 10 times more pipeline than they need. But I don't know that many of people like that. And obviously people that are starting out are definitely not going to be like that. So business development becomes a thing that you have to do. Like, we spend all of our time complaining about sales in B2B product. We're now salespeople. We need to go out and sell to people. We need to go out and sell ourselves to people. We need to position ourselves. We need to constantly work on outreach and re-engagement and basically bothering people to do things that they probably want to do, but it costs money, so maybe they don't want to do it yet. And that's a big part of it. Like, you're not just a product person anymore. You're someone that has to go out there and sell yourself at the same time as being a product person. So kind of getting used to that and embracing that and getting good at that. Again, I'm sure I could improve, but like, that's a big part of it. Like, just walking into it thinking, I'm just a part-time product manager now. I can just, or product leader, and I can just go in and do some product stuff. Like, yeah, you can, but there's a lot more around it, and it can be quite overwhelming, certainly to start with. But it's a constant thing, like, as well. You're always going to be worried about the next contract. You're always worried about where the next work's coming from. You're always having to context switch, not just between tasks within a company, but also between actual companies. I had 2 fractional gigs a little while back, finished at the end of March, and I was hiring senior leaders for both of them at the same time and trying to make sure desperately that I didn't accidentally kind of almost mention things from the other company. I spoke to a fractional CTO once on a meetup call, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I had 2 fractional gigs once, and I was in a board meeting or a management meeting for one of them, and I accidentally went on a big long kind of discussion about something from the other company." Now, I've never done that, but like, I can imagine why that would happen, because you're not just context switching between strategic tasks and tactical tasks. You're also going from strategic tasks to tactical tasks, company to company, industry to industry. So there's a lot around it that you just have to kind of almost fall in love with and embrace the chaos.
Fantastic. My personal observation, just like from running this freelancing course here in my native country, so it's not international, but over the last year, we trained 200 freelancers as I was doing research how they got their first clients. And it narrowed down to two different ways. So first was just like this inbound dish. So either they published something on LinkedIn, maybe they like did a little bit of a warm outreach and sent a couple of texts that they are doing consulting now, if they know somebody that would benefit from their services, or were actively participating in communities by first value commenting, and then you can promote, but you can suggest that you are up for some work as well after you gain their trust. The second one, and that is really difficult for the majority of people to do, was just like to do outbound, to do like cold outreach or something like that. But I think it's a very undervalued strategy, because if we are just like sitting around waiting who will magically contact us from inbound, we are not actively controlling our ICP. And the beauty of outbound approach for me, even if it is very cringe, we have zero rejections, it's not a very pretty thing to do, but we are kind of forced to think who our ideal customer is, and we get into this more proactive role. And of course, as you are personalizing this, you're not like spamming 1,000 people at the same time, but you find a problem or a product or a company that you would love to work with, and then you kind of try to solve, to suggest solution for their problems, to their specific challenges. So it is not like necessarily work light, but it does make all the difference in terms of your controlling how your business will evolve. Because what else is true, as you are snowballing references and case study throughout your career, positioning always happens, right? You want it or you don't want it, but I prefer to actively control it. And if you're just like there working in some industries that might not be the best fit for you, or industries with unhealthy potential to evolve, something like that, I'm a huge believer in outreach, in outbound, and was just like trying to get your thoughts on that as well.
Well, it's an interesting one, right? Because yes, I agree. Like, and it's something that I should be better at. Like, I am actually quite bad at asking people for money. And that's something that I need to get over, right? I think you and I have discussed this before. Like, sometimes you just have to ask people for money because there's a fair value exchange being delivered, and you're doing something that is valuable to them, and they should pay the fair price. Like, that then wins for everyone. Like, as long as they're getting more value than the money that they're spending, then yeah, that's not even really spending money, right? But it isn't. But I am very bad at asking people for money, and I'm very bad at asking people to hire me because I don't know. I don't even know if it's imposter syndrome. It's just like, it just feels, maybe it's my Britishness. It just feels a bit forward. Oh, hey, person from such and such a company, I do all these things. Would you like me to come and do them for you? It's kind of, that's not the British way. We do things much more civilizedly or something like that. I don't know if it's that or not, but it is something that I need to get better at. And I do have this advantage so far, and it's not going to last forever, probably. Who knows? The advantage of, first of all, like, I don't need that many. I'm not an agency. I don't need that many people at once. I only need like a couple of leads going at a time if it's a fractional gig. So, like, I've managed to sustain myself on the inbound so far. But I remember speaking to someone a while back who was like, "Oh yeah, like when they started consulting, they got a few bits of work, and then they were out of work for 6 months before they got the next piece of work." Now, I'm not worried about that because I've built up the runway, which is again the thing that you need to do in a business, thing you need to do as a consultant. You've got the runway. I don't have to panic, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I continue to have that runway. I don't want to burn it all up and then all of a sudden have to panic because that doesn't lead to good decision making. So I do need to get better at outbound, and I do think it's an interesting point, as you say, around like, well, if you're just passively responding to what comes in, I'd say from a sales strategy perspective, that's the worst. So that's what I complain about in companies, like when they do it, because they're just answering any RFP and just kind of going in and trying to tailor their offering to that. Now, obviously, as a service provider, as opposed to a product myself, I can, to some extent, tailor my approach. I don't have like a Jason Knight 4-point plan that is the only thing that I do. Like, I can work around their needs and I can do the things to some extent within a certain kind of boundary that for lots of different types of companies. But if I was working with a company that was all that they did as a product company, that would be one of the first things that I try to change, because that's no way to grow in a sustainable way. I think, yeah, it's just about how do I myself, I've got a more nailed down version of my positioning kind of in the works. How do I myself then start to publicize that? Sure, maybe you get some latent interest, but then how do I actually get that out? Do I use lead generator people? Like, I kind of look at them and I'm like, ew, I don't want to use those. I don't want just like random people or AI kind of call bookers and stuff like that. Like that all feels a bit scuzzy. But at the same time, it kind of feels a bit scuzzy contacting loads of people and asking them to want to work with me. But at the same time, it's probably something that I'm going to have to get over at some point.
Cool. Maybe just like something to play around with. Here is my idea of how I usually do it, right? So for me, sales is basically solving problems and being very enthusiastic about solving them. And I never like kind of get trapped in this vehicle of, am I forcing something to people or something like that? Because it's, here is a problem. I have solved it before. I can just like present a case study and pitch a solution, how I can help them out. And this framing is probably what is different with my approach in how I'm making this happen. And it's more of, let's say, doubling down on what you have been doing previously, because confidence for me requires proof, right? So I tackled one problem, then I think, who else would benefit about having this problem solved effectively, whom am I can realistically help, and then just like the tone of conversation changes. So you're not there like forcing something, but you're there to really like help them. As cheesy as this sound, this is really how I think about value exchange in business. So just like a mental experiment that like listeners or even yourself can do is just like, okay, what is like a piece in my portfolio, like a solution, a presentation, a workshop, or something like that, that I think really has the high potential. And I have tested before. I know it works. People are happy. Maybe they are even able to give me testimonial or recommendation. And who else would benefit from it? I think that this simple framing really put things into perspective, because it kind of becomes your duty to help more people, right? It's not pushing something at them.
Yeah, again, there's that whole Britishness thing going on, and that's again something that I just have to get over as well. Just this whole like, everything has to be polite, and no one should ask anyone for anything. So I don't know if that's again wall to wall across Britain, but it's certainly sort of, yeah. We don't want to make a fuss. That's the kind of part of the British psyche. We don't want to make a fuss. We don't want to bother people. We kind of want to leave them to it. But again, absolutely, I think that your approach makes a lot of sense, and it again would make a lot of sense for any company as well. Like if you've got a type of company that you can best serve, if you've got a type of company that is like the kind of their problems are the things that you're the best place to fix, then you should absolutely have all of the stuff that you just said. So no, I think it's a really valid point, and definitely something that I'm trying to get better at. But I think also I have to acknowledge how privileged I am, because sometimes I sit there and I say, oh, I don't think all of this like podcast that I've done and content that I've done and network I don't think that's been that helpful, because I still have to go out and get work. It's like, well, I do still have to go out and get work. But imagine what it would be like if I didn't have all that stuff. And I've spoken to people that have tried to get into the fractional game, consulting game, coaching game. They're all excited. They put their first post up. They get 1,000 likes or whatever, because everyone's always interested in that kind of transition. They always want to support their people. But like I say, that support is always there, but it's not always as active and vocal, because of course you just become that Spanish speaker like we were talking about before. And they come back to me 3 months later and they're like, I can't find any work. I'm really struggling to find work, or I did some work for someone, didn't like it, or I got dragged into doing something to like what we discussed earlier, something I didn't want to do for that company, and it wasn't very fun, and I don't think I did a good job, etc., etc., etc. And again, I have to acknowledge my privilege, because I've got myself to a certain level of quote unquote reputation, and not everyone has that. So like I to some extent have to enjoy that and enjoy the inbounds, but I do appreciate that I do have to get better at the outbounds. I speak a lot about sales teams these days with product teams to try and bridge that gap, and I'm doing a course about that and all these things to try and help people work together. So I need to almost kind of embrace the sales side as well and actually get out there and do it rather than just relying on whatever reputation I do have, because again, I don't think it's going to last.
No, perfect. And this is just like reputation. It takes forever to build. It can be ruined with one or two bad projects, and you always have to defend it, right? So just like in
Well, no,
terms
but
of,
just on that, just on that though, I was reading a book recently, or I'm still reading a book actually called Flawless Consulting. It's a fairly old book, but it keeps getting updated. And one of the points they make in that book, but just because you mentioned it in about the kind of the reputation thing, there's a very strong argument in that book around even if people don't use your work, even if the engagement was quote unquote a failure for whatever reason, like there's many reasons that an engagement could be a failure, either from your side or from the company side. But as long as you've done your best job as a consultant and you've delivered on what you said you were going to do in your initial kind of whatever you agreed, you've done a good job. You could walk away from a company not having transformed a single bit of it because of all of these things that were just intractable and insolvable. But if you did your bit right, then you've still done a good job and you can still basically sort of hold your head up high and still call yourself a good consultant. So I think it's an interesting one because like we sit there and we get really attached to this idea that, oh well, like I've got to go in, I've got to change that company. Like I personally, I'm like Atlas. I'm gonna hold up the whole company with the strength of my product knowledge. And if they don't do it, it's on me. It's my failure. Now it's obviously possible to fail as a consultant, but I don't think it's as simple as saying, yeah, one bad gig means you're a failure. I think there are many reasons for a bad gig. I remember speaking to one guy once and asking him, again, he'd been doing it for 30 years. I spoke to him and I was like, have you ever kind of called it quits and just left? And he said, yeah, well, there was one company where I was there. A week later, I was like, I don't want to work for you anymore. I can't help you. I will leave now if you just don't ever mention that I worked here. Like it was that kind of exit. And it was just like, and this is one of the most respected consultants that I know in the industry. So it's just a really interesting thing to hear from someone where you expect that with that person that all of them go right. But of course they don't. So yeah, I think it's important to detach your feeling of success from whether everything went perfectly well, because you are just one person, right?
wow, that was super reassuring. Maybe I'm having like this a little bit of paranoia because I love my life and I love my business and I would like to protect it at all possible costs. And as a recovering people pleaser, these things are difficult yet very reassuring to comprehend. So thank you so much for sharing this. Lastly, let's help founders a little bit. So a lot of them are just like overstretched. They are thinking of getting some sort of external help, but it is like maybe quite difficult for them to either acknowledge that they need help or to really find the best fit with advisor slash consultant slash fractional slash whatever you want to call that. So when you are talking to founders, how do you check if you guys are the right fit? How does this conversation look like?
Well, I think first of all, the first part is really important. What you said around like how do they even acknowledge that they need the help in the first place? And like it's an interesting question, right? Because if there's one thing I'll say about founders is that they're generally of a type, right? They're very positive. They think they can make a dent in the planet. They've got the vision. They want to make a big difference, and they almost don't, in many cases, want to admit that they're not good at something or that they need help with something. So I think that one of the first things that's always really important to do when you're speaking to a leader, be it a founder or maybe even a product leader in an organization, depending on your route in, it's important to reassure these people that you being there isn't because they're awful. Like, no one is good at everything, right? I don't know a single person that's good at everything. And it's not a bad thing to sit there and say, I need a little bit of help. A friend that I interviewed on the podcast a few months, years ago, whenever it was, Diane Wiredu, she's a marketing consultant, so probably one of your competitors, but she said something to me, which probably is a longer lived kind of quote or phrase or whatever, but she said to me, it's really hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. And now again, I don't know if she made that up or if that's just a common phrase, but it's true. Like the label's on the outside of the jar, even if the light's shining through it, the text is back to front. You're in it. And when I've worked in companies full time and I've been in it, and you kind of in the cut and thrust and the day to day sort of the troubles that you have and the good things and the bad things and the problems and the solutions, like it all becomes a big noise, and it's really hard to cut through the noise. So reassuring people, both leaders and founders, that the fact that they are asking for help or exploring help is not an indictment on them. It's not that they're doing something stupid or wrong. You're not calling them stupid or wrong. You're not saying that you're cleverer or better than them. All you're saying is you've been out there, you've seen a few things, maybe you've worked with or for more companies than they have. Doesn't mean that you're better than them. It just means that you've got wider experience. You've seen a few more things. You know some of the details about certain things that they're struggling with better than them, not because you're cleverer, but because you've just done it more. So that's like it's trying to build empathy with the person rather than sort of just walking in going, oh, ho, 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 hey, dumb people, like you don't know how to run a business properly and you all suck and oh, your hair's bad as well. Like none of that works. Like you've got to go in there, form a human connection, reassure them that you're not coming in to make them look bad, and then just start getting down to the simple fact of like, well, look, you've acknowledged that there's a problem. You may not acknowledge yet that there's a solution that is the same solution that I would come up with, because of course that's part of the engagement. But at least getting them to acknowledge and name the problem, the thing that keeps them up at night, the thing like the thing that's on fire, or the thing that's going to kind of be on fire if you don't fix it pretty soon. Getting to that kind of level of understanding early, I think, is a really good start. And then, obviously you have to go in there with credibility. You have to go in there, like you say, with case studies, or you need to be able to talk about previous work that you've done, or examples of similar situations. Because another interesting thing is that almost all companies have a version of probably the same problem. So a people problem, a process problem, operational problem, product problem, like technical debt. Like I've not written them all down, but there's probably like 5 or 6 core fundamental problems that all companies have versions of. The expression of how those problems kind of present themselves is obviously always different, but the fact that they have the problems is, it's kind of a constant. And it's also true to say that probably most people think that they're the only people that have that problem. So like going in there and reassuring them that loads of people have this problem. You're not dumb because you've got this problem. This problem happens. It happens for very good and understandable reasons. It's always easy to look back and say, okay, well, yeah, the problem's there because of that. But when they're making these kind of decisions step by step as they go, none of those decisions were probably on their own bad. They've not done the wrong things to get there necessarily, but the sum of those decisions has put them in a spot. So let's accept that, not judge anyone, not call anyone stupid, empathize with them, get them to name the problems, and then hopefully you can then persuade them that you're the person that can go and fix them.
Wow, this was so beautifully, beautifully, beautifully explained. No, seriously, like profoundly, I took a page of notes out of this, just like very humble and very human statement that you just did. Let me add a little bit of a whip to it. So what I believe that we are also in charge of doing is accountability, because sometimes, and I know that as a founder, and maybe you know this as a founder as well, damn, am I better at making things happen if I pay for something? It's not something that I would like again do in another quarter allegedly, but I'm committed. Like I have a lot of more willpower and an energy in order to push things forward. And sometimes, it's like sports. Like if you are in the gym and you have a personal trainer, you're going to work out a little bit more than hanging on this treadmill with your buddies and talking shit. So it's also this, how to say, reinsurance part that we can collect the critical mass and commit towards the process. And what else is true? And I was just like in Graz working with a couple of founders yesterday, and it was really interesting because those ladies who organized it say, Maya, don't mind them. They are Austrians. Maybe they will ask some challenging questions because they are very technical. But I was like, no, I love this. I love people that could possibly challenge me. If I'm sitting there and I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm having ego trips, not business development, right? So I always need somebody who is better in order to push me and ask more challenging questions and just like get me to think on an entirely different level that I wouldn't with my lazy thinking as business as it is, because I am preserving energy. So I need this extra push.
I think that thing about almost accountability or valuing things more because you paid for them, and that's a known cognitive bias as well, right? Like if you bought it, then you own it, right? And it reminds me of a quote from Rich Mironoff, who's one of my favorite kind of thought leaders in the B2B product space. And he came on my podcast a while back now. I should probably get him on again, really. But one of the things he said was like, he finds that CEOs value his contributions in proportion to the size of the invoice. It's like the more they pay, the more they value what he says, because it feels like they've invested in the thing. And this is also something that I've seen. So again, I said I run a mentoring platform on the side, and we classic kind of value proposition: log in, find mentors, get mentored, find mentees, do mentoring, whatever. But I was chatting to a few people around about that space because I wanted to understand, do some good old-fashioned customer development. And there's this kind of feeling for a lot of people that mentorship is fantastic and wonderful and interesting and lovely, and they should do it. But at the same time, it's mainly for free, and therefore it's easy to not do for a bit because you're not committed to it, you're not paid for it. It's all basically on goodwill and kind of vibes. And like, that's fantastic. I believe mentoring should happen. It's really important for people to get mentors. Anyone listening to this that doesn't have a mentor, get at least one mentor. You should. Whether through my platform, which is free, or not, but like, get it from someone. Like, you should get mentorship. But then there are other mentorship platforms out there that charge a fee. And I spoke to people that have used some of these platforms, and they're like, well, yeah, the thing is, yeah, I have to pay, but at the same time, that makes me keep going back because I paid. So it's an interesting mix, because that's the thing that I believe should basically be available to everyone for free, pretty much. Mentorship, I think it's like almost like a human right in business in some way. But the simple act of paying for it makes you do it more. So I think it's an interesting kind of point around, like, yeah, you pay it, you pay for it, and then you want to do it. So this is then translating back to the kind of the consultancy work. Anyone can go out and just speak to someone at some founders meetup and say, oh, well, what did you do in that situation? But if you invest money in something, if you invest money in expertise that knows something that you either know a bit of, or that you maybe have some gaps in, or you never knew because it's just not something that you have expertise in, like, that's an investment and you should take it.
Fantastic. Almost a paradox, though. Okay, not to keep this too long. So, Jason, I know you have like a lot of other things to say, and you know that I'm eager community member of One Night in Product. I attend meetups on Fridays. So these are free networking calls that Jason's organizing every Friday. I've been sending like tons of people there to just like be able to have a platform to talk about something which is going on in their careers or life, right? So I think it's a huge like give back platform that you are creating. But nevertheless, I'm just genuinely fascinated by your willingness to share knowledge with your brain power to present certain concepts that might be ambiguous, or we are maybe neglecting them, and still be not a contrarian but a good critical thinker. So for that, you're one of my favorite voices on LinkedIn. But nevertheless, let's wrap it down with, just like you, inviting folks how they can continue this conversation, and if you have some final messages.
Well, I mean, let's tackle it from the where to get me first. So, like, obviously LinkedIn is a fantastic place to get me. We're all fighting the algorithms as much as everyone, but I'm still there, still beating the drum. So come and find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure we can link that into the show notes. I've got my own website, onenightinproduct.com, with a K for the night. So onenightinproduct.com, which is kind of a great place to get all my podcast episodes of all of the fine thinkers in the world and Maja. Plus also get access to the Slack community and meetups and occasional in-person meetups in the UK as well. So there's lots of stuff over there. It gives you access to the newsletter as well, which is all free. I guess my final message is, look, work and life and business is hard, but don't ever feel that you're alone. Whether you get someone for free, like a mentor, and just have someone to chat to, or whether you kind of set up your own impromptu board of directors, or whether you pay for a board of directors or whether you pay for consultants or coaches, like however you get support, Like no one has to struggle through anything alone. There's always someone that can help you, and there's always someone that will listen. So make sure that you take opportunity or the opportunity of listening or being listened to.
Drop the mic. Thank you so much, Jason. Keep on rocking product, LinkedIn, and beyond. Thanks so much for being a guest today.
Thank you very much.
I like